Welcome to Cast of Wonders, the fiction audio magazine for young adults featuring stories of the fantastic. I'm Graham Dunlop. Today we present part 1 of Saved by Aaron Greenwood. Aaron is a second-year undergraduate at the University of Washington studying chemical engineering with a focus in nanotechnology. Apart from writing and reading, he is a dedicated musician and a member of the Husky Marching Band at the UW. He attended the prestigious Alpha Young Writers Workshop in Pittsburgh for 2 consecutive summers, which features lectures taught by professional fantasy and science fiction authors and the opportunity to meet writers of all ages. The first draft of Saved was written at Alpha, and there have been many revisions since then. Aaron says the inspiration for the story came from the song Savin' Me by Nickelback. It's about controlling one's own fate and recognising when life must be left to chance. Now, if you go searching for Aaron on the net, you will find an Aaron Greenwood on Tumblr. But he is not this Aaron Greenwood, although coincidentally he is also a writer. Your narrator today is the ever-impressive Alasdair Stewart, the writer and journalist from a small island in the middle of the Irish Sea. And now, we've a tale to tell.
Saved by Aaron Greenwood. Sky Sullivan heard the crunching of leaves when Gabriella was still a shadow, camouflaged by the far-off birches. Rather than turning to face her, Sky stood where he was, listening to her familiar stride. "Sky." Gabriella's voice was soft, maybe softer than usual, with a hint of concern. Sky had no choice but to look at her. He gave her a weak smile, but avoided her eyes. It began to rain. A bird called in the distance. Gabriella looked up in the nearby trees, searching for the source, then lowered her head just slightly to meet Sky's gaze. He looked away. Gabriella folded her arms across her chest and surveyed the fine array of foliage surrounding them. "Why are you always out here?" Sky didn't answer at first. He sorted through the explanations he'd given people, his family primarily, but settled on what he considered to be closest to the truth. "It's quiet." His eyes wandered everywhere but to her. "No one else comes here." Instead of responding, Gabriella settled herself on a fallen oak trunk. "You can't expect every single free minute of your life to be spent walking through woods all alone." If I told her, she'd understand, Sky thought. He lowered himself beside Gabriella, bringing himself into a cross-legged position. The coarse bark skinned his thighs. Or maybe she'd think I was too weird to even be friends. Not that it mattered. He'd never tell her. He turned to her, seeing her for the first time since her arrival. Her glossy bronze curls framed her flawless complexion, her green-blue eyes wide and holding his gaze. "She's healthy, at least," Sky observed. "It's not as bad. Not half as bad." Her lifetime was 18,396,743 minutes. Gabriella left as the rain came down harder, but Sky preferred the rain, if it meant he was alone. He paced through the trees, observing everything around him. The leaves above his head looked as though they formed an umbrella, but as he stood between a cedar and an oak, Sky decided it was more like an umbrella you'd find in the trash, one laden with tears and holes, like the one his father had kept his entire life, no matter what Sky's mother had said to persuade him otherwise. "No," Sky said to the ground. "Don't think about him." Sky inspected the dirt beneath his feet, watched a beetle crawl over and disappear underneath a yellowing maple leaf. Anything to take his mind away from him. Anything. The rain had distorted the fallen leaves, staining them in places, leaving drops stagnant upon them. There really were more leaves on the ground than on the trees, Sky noticed as he stared off, his eyes waving through trunks, through to a golden-tinted hill barely visible from inside the silent forest. He thought of his father nonetheless. The distant hill reminded him of the days they had spent there when he was young, exploring, discovering its secrets, or just lying on their backs watching the stars. He remembered the absurd stories his father had created. Stories about the goblins, immortal, hideous creatures keeping cover in the cave under the tree, whose branches never bore leaves. He had never really believed the stories, but his father had obviously enjoyed creating them, so Sky had listened and searched the caves, looking for signs of the imaginary goblins' whereabouts for the first 8 years of his life. A brisk autumn breeze sent leaves of red, gold, yellow, and orange into a whirlwind, spiralling up, surrounding him. Light rain was still falling, creating an almost magical effect. The rain had yet to cease by the next morning when Sky dragged himself out of bed and started for school. He walked most of the way with his sister, Emma, who was oddly silent that morning. Sky remained silent as well. He tried not to look at her as she dawdled beside him. Instead, he watched the sky. The clouds were dark and dreary, like all life had been sucked out of them. Sky's school was much the same as the clouds, he often thought. Dark, dreary, no life. A beige square building, graffiti on the wall by the basketball court, 10 identical classrooms, 2 windows in each, looking out to a dismal view of a run-down gas station and a McDonald's. It was the only high school in his tiny town. He waved at his sister as he walked through the gate, and she continued down the street to her own middle school. Still 10 minutes until the bell signalling the start of homeroom. 10 minutes. Nearly half the school was crowded near the front entrance, gossiping, flirting, standard procedure. Sky leaned against a tree, watching cars pass by, one occasionally turning into the student parking lot. No one noticed him, and that suited him just fine. He tried not to notice them either. His heart sped up, and he shot to his feet, halfway towards one of the boys before he realised what he was doing. "Nate!" he shouted above the laughter and the drone of a car engine. Sky ran faster. Nate turned. Sky froze. "What am I doing? They'll wonder. They'll find out. I haven't done this for years. I can't. But he'd already drawn attention to himself. Nearly everyone looked at him now. It gave him a headache. As he thought up an excuse, he watched Nate's lifetime drop to a minute, 30 seconds, 25, 20. He couldn't do it. He looked the others in the eye and silently grabbed Nate by the wrist, dragging him away from where he'd been standing. A red Honda skidded around the corner, brakes screeching. It crashed into the tree where Nate had stood just a moment before. Smoke issued from the engine. Someone screamed. People ran towards the total car. "What the hell was that?" Nate asked, his eyes wild with bewilderment and fright. Sky didn't answer, but instead examined him as his lifetime rose rapidly and intensely. Miss Ackland didn't come to class that day. An old bald man took her place. He spoke in a loud, monotonous voice, a voice perfectly suitable for the narrator of a boring science film. He didn't mention Miss Ackland, or where she was. Miss Ackland was the only teacher Sky liked, and he enjoyed her class because of her, not because of what she taught him. She never questioned the odd way Sky watched people, like he was looking through them, knowing they're there but not really seeing them. She didn't correct him when he stared at his feet while talking, rather than at her. And with her gone, Sky paid less attention than usual. The halls were quiet an entire week. Nobody exchanged more than a few words between classes. Nobody mentioned the senior who had been sent to the hospital from losing control of his car and crashing into a tree. But Sky knew that something else had happened that day as well, though he was still trying to figure out what that was. Sky threw his book bag next to the morning's newspaper on the kitchen table and grabbed an apple from the green porcelain bowl. The newspaper was open to the obituaries page. Boring. Sky picked it up to search for the comics and froze. One page in each hand, staring at a picture of a lady on the page his mother had obviously been reading. Above the picture was a caption. Below it, a small paragraph. Alice P. Ackland, high school history teacher, dies at 37. Alice Ackland, 11th grade history teacher at Benton High School in Western Oregon, was found dead last Tuesday morning. Investigations are being held, but at the moment no one has any information pertaining to the cause of her sudden death. Ackland was found by her husband, Theodore, lying on the floor of their bedroom, with no visible signs of illness or murder. Sky crumpled the paper into a ball and threw it at the wall. There must have been a mistake. People don't just fall down dead for no reason. He thought of Nate and the boy who was in the hospital because he crashed his car outside the school. The boy would live, but Sky didn't even know him. He thought of his father. He tried not to. He thought of Gabriella and how they had met. They had been 8. 2 little kids who had only shared the conversations, "Will you pass the blue crayon?" and "Should I draw horns on my purple bird?" Their 2nd grade class had gone to the community pool for an end-of-year party. Sky had played water tag in the shallow end with his best friend at the time, Nate Simmons, and a few other boys. On the opposite end of the pool, Gabriella and one of her friends were unsuccessfully attempting to swim down 8 feet and touch the bottom of the pool faster than the other. Nate half swam, half bounced towards Sky after seeing his eyes transfixed on Gabriella and her friend. Sky was supposed to be chasing him. "Sky, come on, chase me, you're it!" When Sky didn't respond, only continued watching the spot where Gabriella had just dived down, Nate gently pushed him, making him stumble and fall face first into the water. His eyes stung with chlorine, and frustrated, he swam around Nate and pushed him from behind when he wasn't expecting it. After a friendly water fight, Sky forgot about Gabriella, which was exactly Nate's intention. From a table near the pool's edge, their teacher called lunch. As all young children do when hearing that word, he scrambled up the steps, Nate a step or 2 behind him, and sat down with all 20-odd children. Plates of hot dogs and chips were already set up before them. It was exactly a minute later that he realised the meaning of what he had seen in the pool, and so many times before, and when he saw an empty seat a few people down from him, he stood up, knocking his chair over. All heads turned to him. His teacher looked at him sceptically, and one kid laughed at his abrupt rising. He saw none of it, didn't hear the laughter, but instead ran to the edge of the pool, looking down into the deep end. He could see a shapeless mound, squirming helplessly at the bottom. He cannonballed into the pool without thinking, his teacher yelling his name. He ignored her. The dark figure loomed closer and closer as he swam down until he could vaguely distinguish the blurry outline of a small body, long, stringy hair flailing out in every direction. His lungs screamed. He'd never held his breath this long before. Go back to the surface, part of him said, but he couldn't. He'd never make it down this far again if he did. Please be okay, he thought. Even though he barely knew her then, Sky couldn't imagine one of his classmates drowning. Kids don't die. Old people die. He reached the bottom of the pool, his ears throbbing and ringing, his lungs close to bursting. Now what? He realised he had no idea what he was going to do now. There was no way he could just pull someone his size 8 feet up to the surface. He touched Gabriella's arm and turned her over, looking at her eyes. Clearly unconscious, but she was not dead. Yet. If Sky didn't get her to air in less than 3 minutes, she would be. Her finger was caught in the drain. It looked as though she had deliberately stuck it in there, but had been unable to get it out afterwards. Her skin had a faintly purple tint to it. Dizzy from lack of air, he looked up towards the surface. The sun looked rippled through the water, as did the faces staring down at him. He swam up, pushing on the side of the pool with his foot to gain momentum. He broke the surface, gasping and spitting up water. "Gabriella!" he managed to whisper before he passed out. His teacher had run to the pool not long after he had disappeared beneath the water and, seeing 2 bodies instead of 1, shouted for the lifeguard. Both Gabriella and Sky were sent to the hospital to make sure they were not permanently harmed, and talked a great deal there. Gabriella, primarily, wanted to know what had happened after she passed out onto water. Sky just told her vaguely that he had seen someone lying on the bottom of the pool and went to investigate. In turn, Gabriella told him her story. She had dropped the ring her father had given her down there, and it had fallen in the drain. She had gotten her finger stuck trying to retrieve it. She was sad no one had bothered to get the ring after they saved her. After they left the hospital, they didn't see each other for a few days, because that was the same night Sky's father died. A door creaked. Sky turned and his mom flashed him a quick smile from the doorframe and, shifting the overflowing brown paper bag in her hands, called out to a figure behind her, whose face was completely hidden behind a similar bag. "Emma, put these away for me, will you, dear? Sky, help your sister while I make a quick phone call." "Yes, Sky, I'm dying here. You think they put boulders in the bag, not fruits?" She staggered and almost dropped the grocery bag. Sky relieved her of the bag as he glanced at her eyes, as he did to her at least once a day. Emma was tall for her age, barely 11, and less mature, but innocent, naive. She was popular, but stupid, in his opinion anyway. Emma's strawberry blonde curls pulled back in a ponytail gleamed with sweat. As Sky threw a bunch of bananas in a bowl on the counter, Emma slumped down on a stool, spinning it round, then stopping it by putting her hand on the counter. "Emma, what are you doing?" Sky asked, exasperated. "I'm spinning." Mom told you to help me. I carried him in. Nearly broke my back. Put the frozen stuff in the fridge before it all melts. Why? I carried them in. You didn't do anything. You should have to put them away. That's how our world should work. The mother buys the food, the poor little girl carries it all inside, and the stupid teenager puts it all away. It reminds me of Bug's life. The sun grows the food, the ants pick the food, and the grasshoppers eat the food. She giggled. Sky rolled his eyes, incredulous. How someone could remember as many stupid, useless quotes from stupid, useless movies was beyond him. Well, I guess that makes me the grasshopper then, and you the ant, so you have to listen to me. He crossed his arms over his chest and leaned back against the counter, trying to look authoritative. Emma glared, angry at him for using her own quote against her, and grabbed a box of frozen peas. She drove him crazy. But he felt responsible for her, since she had lived her entire life without a father, apart from when she was too young to remember anything, and their mom hadn't been the same. Sky remembered her from when he was young, energetic and optimistic. Now she tried hard to be happy-go-lucky, but was always distracted, easily made careless mistakes. Sky silently unpacked the rest of the bags, Emma hindering more than helping. For once he didn't remind her. Every few minutes he looked up into her eyes. 2,964 minutes. 2,961. No way, he thought. It's impossible. Emma looked at him suspiciously, as if asking why he kept looking at her, but said nothing. I'll be right back, he told her. His book bag lay still on the table, the place where the newspaper had been before he'd thrown it across the room. Sky zipped open the bag, pulled out his calculator. 2,960 minutes. About 2 days and 2 hours. He looked back up at his sister. 2,957. He whispered. Sky sighed and shook his head. Nothing. He tottered up the hall to his bedroom, slamming the door shut behind him.
And so ends part 1 of Saved. 2 days and 2 hours to go. What will happen to Emma? Join us next time for part 2 and find out. Drop by our forum and tell us what you think of part 1. Did you like it? Visit castofwonders.org/forums and hit us with your feedback, but preferably not the guitar kind. Cast of Wonders is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. Share it, but don't change it or sell it. Theme is Appeal to Heavens by Alexei Nov from musicalley.com.